June 2024. 6 miles north of Woodward, Oklahoma, the old Dry Creek Ranch had gone 17 days without a working well. 23 cattle stood around an empty steel trough, while dust moved across the pasture in thin brown sheets. County Livestock Inspector Daniel Price stepped out of his truck carrying a clipboard and an order authorizing the removal of the herd. Grace Miller had until sunset to prove that the ranch possessed a reliable source of water. Then Daniel heard something beneath the ground. It was faint, almost hidden by the wind, but unmistakable. Water moving through stone. Grace led him toward a covered reservoir beside the northern pasture. A narrow stream entered through an old clay pipe and fell steadily into the dark tank. The flow looked too small to support a ranch, yet the reservoir was nearly full. Only 19 days earlier, that pipe had been buried, broken, and forgotten. If you enjoy stories about abandoned farms, hidden family clues, and people who discover value where everyone else sees failure, subscribe and stay with us. Grace was 27 when she bought Dry Creek Ranch at a bank auction. The property included 68 acres, an aging farmhouse, a collapsing barn, one unreliable well, and 23 cattle left behind after the previous owner disappeared into debt. She paid $9,200, nearly every cent she had saved while working as a veterinary assistant in Woodward. Her nearest neighbor, Owen Beck, warned her that the ranch had not carried dependable water in decades. The pond was dry, the windmill had fallen, and the well pump coughed sand each time it started. 3 days after Grace moved in, the pump stopped completely. The bank gave her 19 days to establish permanent water access. Otherwise, the loan would be canceled and the cattle sold. Grace began hauling water in borrowed tanks, but one delivery cost more than she earned in a week. She knew she could not continue. While searching through the property records, she found a fragile page attached to a deed from 1938. One sentence had been written beneath the boundary description. Permanent spring rights begin beneath the North Stone Trough. The North Trough still existed. It had been dry for 47 years. The stone trough stood near the northern fence, half filled with rusted wire, old feed sacks, and wind-blown soil. It was nearly 12 feet long and built from blocks too heavy for Grace to move alone. Owen remembered seeing water there as a child, but he believed the spring had vanished after the county widened the road in the late 1970s. "The deed describes a dead place," he told her. "A sentence cannot make water return." Grace hired a small excavator and lifted the trough from its foundation. Several neighbors stopped along the road to watch. They expected her to uncover an old spring chamber. Instead, she found a concrete pad, broken glass, horseshoes, and one rusted pipe that ended after less than 3 feet. Grace dug deeper. The soil became harder and drier. Beneath the concrete lay dense red clay with no sign of moisture. After 4 days, she had created a deep trench and spent most of the money reserved for cattle feed. The bank called that afternoon. 15 days remained. Owen offered to buy the herd before the animals lost weight. His price was fair, but accepting it would leave Grace with empty land and no income. That evening, she searched the barn for old plumbing plans. Behind a loose shelf, she discovered a wooden box containing tax papers, photographs, and a faded image of Dry Creek Ranch taken before the road was rebuilt. The photograph showed the same stone trough, but it was not standing where Grace had been digging. Behind it rose a tall windmill that no longer existed. A low stone wall curved from the trough toward the eastern hill. In the modern pasture, that wall ended abruptly, more than 40 yards from the current location of the trough. Grace returned outside with the photograph. She aligned the distant hills, the barn roof, and the road. The old owners had moved the trough when construction changed the fence line. The deed did not promise water beneath the stone object itself. It referred to the place where the trough had once stood. Grace had spent 4 precious days digging beneath the wrong landmark. Finding the original position was harder than identifying the mistake. The windmill foundation had been removed. The pasture had been graded several times, and weeds covered the remaining section of the old wall. Grace measured distances from the photograph, but every estimate ended in dry ground. 10 days remained. During the hottest afternoon of the month, the cattle left the shade and gathered near the broken wall. Grace assumed they were waiting for the water trailer, but the trailer stood on the opposite side of the pasture. One old red cow pressed her nose between two stones and began licking the surface. Grace pulled the stones apart. A thin patch of green moss covered the shaded side of the lower block. The surrounding grass was completely brown, yet the soil beneath the wall felt cool. Grace marked the place and returned the following morning. The moss was damp again. She ruled out leaks from the tanks and irrigation lines. Nothing carried water near that fence. With a shovel, she removed the soil beside the wall and struck a flat stone buried at an angle. A second stone lay beneath it, followed by a narrow, hollow channel packed with roots and clay. This was not a natural spring opening. Someone had built it. Grace followed the channel uphill and found more carefully placed rock beneath the pasture. The structure resembled a shallow, underground tunnel designed to collect seepage and guide it downhill. She attempted to clear it herself. After several feet, loose soil collapsed into the opening. A section of the wall shifted, nearly trapping her arm beneath the stones. Worse, the collapse blocked whatever moisture had been moving through the channel. 7 days remained. Grace called Dr. Hannah Cole, a hydrologist at a regional agricultural college. Hannah arrived with soil probes, old survey maps, and a small camera designed to inspect buried pipes. She explained that early ranchers sometimes constructed underground collection galleries. These systems intercepted slow seepage from hillsides and directed it toward a trough without using pumps. The road project had crushed the lower section. Later owners moved the trough but never restored the channel. The spring had not disappeared. Its water had been escaping underground for nearly half a century. Hannah warned Grace that the hidden gallery might produce only a weak flow. They opened 3 test sections along the old wall. Beneath each one, flat stones formed a narrow channel over gravel. Roots, clay, and collapsed soil blocked most of the passage. Grace, Hannah, Owen, and 2 neighbors worked for 3 days. They removed debris by hand, replaced broken stones, and installed a short clay pipe where the road construction had crushed the original outlet. A sealed storage tank was placed below the channel so the water could accumulate without evaporating. When they opened the repaired passage, nothing happened. Dry air came through the pipe. Then dark mud dripped into the tank. Grace watched for nearly an hour before the first clear thread of water appeared. It was so thin that Owen could stop it with one finger. The source produced far less water than Grace had imagined. 23 thirsty cattle could empty the tank faster than the spring could refill it. 4 days remained. Grace divided the pasture into smaller sections and installed a float-controlled trough. Water entered slowly during the night, then released only when the cattle approached. She covered the storage tank, repaired the old pond to capture storm runoff, and scheduled the herd so every animal could drink without crowding. Even with those changes, the calculations did not work. Grace sold 4 of the weakest cattle to Owen. It was painful, but keeping all 23 would have endangered the entire herd. On the inspection morning, Daniel Price measured the spring flow, checked the tank, and watched the remaining animals drink. The pipe alone looked inadequate, but the covered reservoir stored enough water between visits, and the float system prevented waste. Grace also maintained 1 emergency trailer for unusually hot days. Daniel did not approve the system immediately. He waited until afternoon, returned after the cattle had drunk twice, and checked the reservoir again. The water level was rising. Grace received permission to keep the remaining herd. She had not discovered an unlimited spring. She had built a system around a small, continuous one. 3 weeks later, a dry thunderstorm crossed Woodward County. Lightning started a grass fire near the highway, forcing officials to close the main road. Power lines were damaged, and several ranches lost electricity to their well pumps. Water delivery trucks could not enter the area for almost 2 days. Owen's electric pump stopped while his youngest calves were separated in a distant pasture. He came to Grace's ranch with empty tanks and an expression she had never seen before. The old stone gallery was still running. It needed no motor, fuel, or power line. Water moved through the hill by gravity and collected beneath the covered tank exactly as it had decades earlier. Grace could not supply every ranch in the county. The flow was too small. But she gave enough water to Owen's calves and 2 neighboring families until the road reopened. Hannah later helped her document the entire system. They found references to similar spring galleries in old deeds, family photographs, and handwritten property maps across western Oklahoma. Some had collapsed completely. Others carried contaminated water or produced too little to justify repairs. But several still contained usable seepage. Grace began working with small ranch owners who could not afford deep wells or constant tanker deliveries. She searched old records, compared forgotten landmarks, studied animal behavior, and located gravity-fed channels buried beneath fields and walls. Most searches did not end with flowing water. The successful ones mattered enough to build a business. Within several years, Grace's company restored old collection galleries, installed covered tanks, reduced evaporation, and created emergency water reserves for small herds. The value of her contracts eventually reached millions of dollars. Dry Creek Ranch never became a large cattle operation. Its spring remained modest, and Grace never claimed that forgotten channels could solve every drought. But the ranch survived. Near the restored stone wall, she returned the old trough to its original position. Water entered slowly through the clay pipe and reflected the Oklahoma sky. The deed had told the truth all along. The spring did begin beneath the stone trough. The problem was that nearly everyone had forgotten where the trough once stood.